right, you happily, you joyously miserable accursed. Herle here with your political panel, Kory Teneycke, Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz. Let's get right to it, team, because we're going to try to squeeze a bonus fourth topic into a space that holds three comfortably. Sort of like the middle seat on any Air Canada flight. Anyway, we'll do a preview of Minister Freeland's fall economic statement on November 21st. Last week, we promised we'd talk about the UCP Convention. A week later is better than never. Our cursed clipping is Ian Austin writing in the New York Times about the steep uphill battle facing both Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden, and then a few minutes on how much political confidence we have in the confidence and supply agreement. And finally, I'll ask the great Gordon Pinson to herald our HEUs. Kory, Jordan, Scott, good weekend. Scott, don't answer. Jordan, Kory, good weekend.
Yeah, good weekend. Yeah, good weekend.
Yeah, it was a good weekend.
Where'd you spend it, Kory?
I spent it in Toronto, unpacking boxes and trying to finalize settling into our new condo.
There you go. Scott and I were at a football game on Saturday afternoon, and it was no fucking good.
It was unbelievable. Well, first of all, we were so high above the city that I thought we'd need a pilot's license to get to our seats. It was fucking high, and it was very, very windy and cold. And then Chad Kelly behaved as if someone had spiked his drink. It was just a bizarre performance. But we were together, and that's what matters.
It's okay. Like losing together builds character. I would know.
David and I ought to give lectures then.
That's right. That's why they call Scott a character. All right. So Chrystia Freeland has announced the date of the fall economic statement. Boom, boom. This was the case, Scott, in years past when Jenny Byrne would mock you and I for our love of budgets and economic statements. But obviously, this is an opportunity for the government to start to align its policy agenda with Canadians a little bit better. So, Scott, what are you looking for in this fall statement?
Well, there's an important change, I think, which is interesting. Our friend Andrew Bevan, he used to be Chief of Staff to Premier Wynne, has joined Freeland's office. So not to put, all the pressure in the world on his shoulders, I'm curious to see if Andrew helps to facilitate a different kind of economic statement, because Jenny was right to make fun of us, because every year we go, this is going to be an opportunity for them to tell a fundamental, gripping, John Carpenter-esque, can't take your eyes off of its story about the government and its focus.
With PowerPoint.
And every year.
With PowerPoint.
With PowerPoint, exactly. Exactly. We've managed to get this time machine working, and it's shaken someone from 1997 out of it. And but anyway, that never happened. So I am hopeful in these dire times of volcano and ash that Bevan will help to spin a yarn that helps people understand a little bit about what the government's trying to prioritize, why that connects to them, how that connects to them. I mean, I have the same old song always and always. I want the government to present a plan, one that actually makes sense, talks in the language that people talk in, connects to the things they care about, maybe makes sense if you Venn diagram the potential voter coalition over top of it. It's why I'm so anxious about this discussion about fiscal responsibility, because when I hear ministers talk about it like it's a sudden priority above all others from this Liberal government, and that it's an end unto itself. We must get the deficit down. We must demonstrate fiscal discipline. It doesn't make sense to me. It's a question that no one's asking.
It's a low priority for even most conservative voters, much less anybody else.
Yeah. So I'm kind of hoping they'll say, listen, and this would be my pitch. We've got some some really raw near-term priorities. We have to help people through this affordability crisis. We've got to do what we can to help with respect to housing. But the biggest thing the government can do in the near term is not add any bricks to the interest rate scale, right? And I think if they start talking about, listen, we're going to do everything we can within our responsibility and our control to help control spending, like make it about, if we're going to control spending in order to bring interest rates down, or at least help the bank bring interest rates down, then that starts a cascade of positive things. We've been on a cascade of negative things since the pandemic. So let's start a cascade of positive things. And ultimately, we must keep our eye on the ball of jobs and growth. I think that people are starting to grow anxious as the Bank of Canada strategy actually starts to work. And by that, I mean, we're starting to hear larger and larger employers talk more and more about layoffs. And I think that that's going to manifest 8, 9, 15, 24 months down the road in real concerns about jobs and income. And, listen, you want to be the puck is going, to use the old cliche. And where the puck is going, I think, is jobs and growth. So you got to talk about the near term, but you got to talk about how that plugs into the longer term. And you got to hope that interest rates come down so that you're in a position to say, see, we've been talking about the importance of jobs and growth and good paying jobs for the past 2 years. And our plan is actually starting to realize them. So I hope we'll get all that, but we're probably just going to list of statistics and then it'll be over.
Kory, it does seem as though the government now wants to be thought of as fiscally responsible. Certainly that's a lot of the language that the finance minister uses about what's upcoming. They bothered to announce $500 million in cuts a week ago, and try to profile their ongoing cost-cutting exercise. Will they achieve anything through this? I mean, my sort of feeling is, A, that it's not where their voters are to begin with, and second of all, the people who care about that are never going to take them seriously.
I think both those things are true. But let's also just look at how irrelevant $500 million on a $200 billion budget is in terms of the amount of fiscal discipline. Like, I'm gonna find 0.5% worth of things that are maybe not as much of a priority somewhere down the line. Like, it just lacks any credibility. I'm not going to make as much fun of you as Jenny did around your obsession with budgets, but I think here's the key difference. You guys had good news to report. You would set targets and you jump over them. You would exceed them and announce that the deficit was smaller than anticipated, that you guys were doing better. Like, that was sort of I always thought the great trick of the Chrétien-Martin budgets was to set very cautious assumptions and then exceed them and have, like, in that way, every budget's a good news budget. I don't think that's going to be the case in this fiscal update. I think the deficit's going to be a lot bigger than they'd anticipated. I think things are going on a worse track. And I'll disagree with Scott that this is good news if the economy is slowing. It is cataclysmically bad fucking news for this government. And if they think that that's how they're going to get reelected, is by working with the Bank of Canada to shut, to spiral the Canadian economy into recession and have job losses, then I got to tell you, might as well just open the door and hand over the keys of Longevin Block to Pierre Poilievre and his team, because that's what's going to happen.
Is that what I said? Because it sounds worse from Kory. It doesn't sound.
Well, I'm putting a little
different than what I had in mind, but I don't know.
It's called spin for a reason. I'm taking what you said and I'm twisting it a little bit. You see, but look,
but that's the case, isn't it? I mean, Kory's right. I mean, that one way or another, either by government withdrawing spending or by the Bank of Canada, for inflation to come down, the economy has to come to a dead fucking stop.
Yeah, well, this is the perversity
that is terrible
of it, right?
Politics. That is terrible politics. Now, there may be...
You can't get around that. The question is, can you get through it?
There may be a rainbow on the other end, but is it in 2025, or does Poilievre get that rainbow in 2026? That's
the risk.
Right?
Well, but you guys have talked about this before, and I think you're exactly right. Like, the economy was coming out of recession in 92, 93, and was out of a recession by the time the 93 election came along. But the hangover of a recession and an economic slowdown tends to have pretty broad shoulders. It tends to go on well past the point of the economy actually having turned around. So, like, it would have to be turning around today, or in the next 6 months, before you would see a positive upswing from that politically, if you're using historic examples as our guide. But I don't think we're anywhere near bottoming out. I think things are slowing. They've almost stopped. I think we're going to go into recession is my guess. And basing this on on sort of the consensus of an economic analysis out there. But that's all really bad. And interest rates could continue to go up. We could see rates raised a couple more times before they start coming down. Just remember
now
the
you're
geniuses.
No,
but the geniuses.
Nobody really thinks that.
Well, the geniuses at the Bank of Canada were telling us that we were having, transitionary inflation and that was temporary and it was all going to be gone. And then they changed their tune. It's, I would say the Bank of Canada has been about 10% better than the science table during the pandemic in terms of having success and predictions around this stuff. So, I don't know. We'll see, right? But either way you look at it, the political prognosis doesn't change very much. It's bad and getting worse. And $500 million worth of cuts that maybe might happen is not going to be viewed by any bond rating agency out there in the universe as fiscal discipline, especially not from this government, who can find $500 million in new spending before breakfast on any given Tuesday.
Jordan, what do you think the Liberals are going to try to accomplish with this update?
Well, I mean, if we look at what they've put out so far, I don't think that they're actually going to accomplish a whole lot. I think what they're trying to do is find some sort of a middle path where they indicate fiscal responsibility. That's obviously what they're talking about in terms of finding savings, that they've pre-framed everything with that. But, I think it's, as Scott said, like, is this a question that anyone is actually asking? I don't think it is. And I think that what Kory has raised, maybe a couple of degrees full of hot air more than the reality would indicate. But there's grains of truth there. I mean, the perversity of our system is such that when the central bank's efforts to control inflation's work, we are likely driving the economy into a recession. We are already seeing unemployment going up. People are feeling this. They're feeling also that prices are stubbornly high, that home prices are stubbornly high, mortgage payments. We've got 60% of Canadian mortgages that are up for renewal. So all of this stuff is a bit of a perfect storm brewing, where Canadians are absolutely feeling this in the most visceral way possible. And then you've got the government out there indicating that they would like to frame the fiscal update around finding savings. And I think that they really run the risk of pleasing no one with this, because people who are truly concerned about the fiscal sustainability of the government are not going to be bought off by the tiny amounts of savings that the government is floating, nor does anyone who really think that this is a problem find that to be credible as an overall approach for these guys. But then on the other hand, you have the broad majority of Canadians who are feeling these really unprecedented generational affordability crisis manifesting now in their own lives. And whereas for the last few years, even as you faced these growing household costs going up and up and up, you had the hope of, like, you could change your job, right? You could argue for higher wages. That's now disappearing. And so this is, I think, a moment really of maximum peril for the government politically. And so that's why I'm puzzled at their approach on this. I think that their message is not convincing on fiscal restraint. And I think it's actually counterintuitive to what Canadians want. They want to know the government is in tune with what they're feeling, and they want to know that help is going to be there. And it doesn't signal any of those things.
So let me get something out there, way out there, final frontier out there. I'm a space guy, not a Star Wars guy, a Star Trek guy. In Herle world, beam me up Scotty beats may the force be with you all to hell. So I'm pretty chuffed to talk about a giant leap in network technology our presenting sponsor TELUS is investing in. They're literally beaming up signals to satellites and back down to Earth to deepen our digital connectivity. TELUS has just partnered with Canada's own TerraStar Solutions under the Strigo brand name to successfully test satellite connectivity for mobile voice calls, and in another partnership with Skylo, a non-terrestrial network service provider, to send text messages and connect to Internet of Things devices. Stuff like smart thermostats, connected healthcare monitors, smart agriculture equipment, and more. This is fresh and transformational stuff. The trial happened just last month. The thinking is it's going to fill several of the existing gaps in mobile networks. Among other things, customers in their most remote areas, like hikers and campers, will suddenly have mobile access no matter where they are, even on an exposed rock face at 12,000 feet. It'll provide backup connectivity so emergency services are never out of reach, even when natural disasters impact networks and damage cell towers. It's going to dramatically improve how massive industries do their remote fieldwork and monitor critical operations like forestry, energy, and scientific research. And it'll deliver real-time data, including temperature, water, and site-specific information to farmers to improve decision-making and sustainability in remote agriculture. It's another example, Hurly-Burleyites, of what we've been on about here these last weeks. TELUS investing to drive innovation, social purpose, and the Canadian economy. That's how they like to put it anyway. Staying with the theme, I'd say it a little differently, so we all live long and prosper. Yeah, I think that people are quite a bit more concerned about their own financial situation than they are about the government's deficit situation. I think that one of them is considerably more grave. Scott, do you have any ideas about how they would start to shift the narrative toward jobs and growth from where they're at?
Well, first of all, I think you have to do that in two steps. And I think a big part of this update should be the first step, but with hinting at the second step, which is jobs and growth. And by that, I mean this, like, you know, literally, Jordan just put it perfectly, because the government seems content to begin and end its message from an economic priority standpoint as we want to cut spending, we want to save spending, and that's like as though that meets some sort of objective of anyone out there. And to my mind, I think they've got to start with, if that is an inevitability, if they want to actually signal they're going to control spending, well, then connect it to something that people care about, that a benefit that actually accrues to real people. And if you can't get around the fact that the economy is weakening and that there is a threat of a recession and the interest rates are going to remain high for a period, then try to put together some kind of notion that you have a plan that's swimming in the right direction. So I would be saying, listen, we're not focused on the deficit. We're not going to be cutting spending for the sake of cutting spending, right? We're going to try to control our spending, because one of the few things we can do as a government to get interest rates down sooner rather than later, right, is to control our spending so that we don't make a bad thing worse. And I'd be trying to signal that. And I hear Kory laughing, but it's at least more modest and less ridiculous than saying we're going to cut spending and then they cut
adding additional, social programs. Like this
is the other problem they have, which is
how can you sell that while you're saying national pharmacare and
exactly
they're creating,
which is my real fear.
There will be no national pharmacare program.
I think we're going to see something. But listen,
you'll see a framework. You're not going to see any money flow, Jordan. There can't be.
But my big fear is that Kory's right directionally, and that what they end up saying is we're cutting spending in some places so that we can finance these big other projects of spending. That makes no sense to me. You got to be saying, look, we're controlling spending in order to bring interest rates down so you can better manage your mortgage and eventually afford that home. And then we get through this thing faster and we can start creating jobs and growing. But saying we're cutting spending in order to spend more on pharmacare and home.
Whether you do it or not, whether you bring in pharmacare or not, from a communications perspective, you're saying you're going to. So, we're realists and say that's never going to happen. And I think we're right about that. But for everyone else out there in voterland who are just receiving the message, they're hearing we're going to spend, record amounts of more money on a new entitlement program. Oh, by the way, we're exercising fiscal discipline. We're going to spend, we're going to cut spending by 1/10 of what that program would cost. It just, whether they actually do it or not, it doesn't matter. The comms on this is completely fucked. It's completely fucked. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth.
It's also crazy that I don't know, maybe this is the case. Maybe someone's got a break glass in case of emergency plan on this. But Bank of Canada mandate around target inflation, I think that has to also be part of the conversation. If they want something that is going to be able to pivot and really look like a little bit of action on that, I think Scott makes certainly a factual argument around controlling spending to control inflation, but that's a lot of leaps for people to make. And I think that you have a much more direct line supported by premiers if you look at the Bank of Canada mandate around target inflation.
Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm freighted with their reality. They insist they're going to talk about cutting spending. So my argument is don't say it's the what and the why. If the what is that you're going to reduce spending, right, or at least in some places, first of all, the what isn't that I'm suddenly a deficit hawk, because that's horseshit and it's not believable. The what is I'm going to control spending, not cut it. And the why is so that I can actually get you a benefit. It can't be so that I can spend on the things I have to because the NDP
Scott,
has my balls in advice.
The problem with what I'm hearing from you on this is that it feels like it would be the second time in 2 weeks that they accepted Poilievre's diagnosis of the situation. I mean, can they really accept the fact that government spending is fueling inflation?
Well, they can accept that to add a ton of spending will make the situation worse. Well, let me put it this way. I'm operating under the rules that they are telling us they're going to play by. So if they're going to talk to us that the fall economic statement is going to be about reducing spending or cutting spending or controlling spending, I'm trying to connect it to some fucking rationale that would have some measure of political benefit. No matter how tortured it is, Kory sits in the corner and laughs at me in his little Zoom box. Like if you're going to say, well, I'm cutting spending because we suddenly delight in cutting spending, or we're going to cut spending because we want to spend more in these other places that you don't think you'll benefit from, but we'll benefit because it's what the NDP's extracted from me.
I don't know about you, Jordan. I do not think they need to be an inauthentic version of Poilievre. I think they need to be an alternative to Poilievre. Yeah. They need to have a counter vision.
Right now, I think it just underscores the Prime Minister's weakness within the brand of his own government, and they've lost the thread on this. And I don't think that any effort to signal fiscal restraint at this point, particularly when it seems so inauthentic, I don't think it's going to yield them anything. And I actually think it's a big vulnerability for them because from the right flank, they get pilloried as being unserious about this. And then from the left flank, they can get accused of cutting back when Canadians need more help than ever. So, for what? What's the benefit here?
And imagine their brand. They've made their brand, "We have your back." What's that going to mean through this next year?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they know anymore. Clearly.
Well, who's back? Certainly not anybody in the middle class. Like it's they've given up on that. It's niche little voter groups decided by the NDP. It's not the people who brought them there to office.
Sorry, Kory. I was just going to say, if you're building from scratch, you'd start where they started in 2015. And I know people go, well, you can't go back. I don't know. I kick a can at it. Like I go back and say the fall economic statement is this. We're post-pandemic, post-inflation going crazy here and all around the world. It's a new set of economic rules. Suddenly you can't trade. Supply lines are all fucked up. So what's a new middle-class covenant? We came into power 8-9 years ago telling you that we were going to serve the middle class. Well, the whole wide world has turned on its ear now. So what's a new middle-class covenant? What are the policy parameters that you want to follow? What are the priorities you want to extol? And I would start with that and then have people go, okay, well then and maybe they get made fun. But right now, it's
this is not about people joining the middle class. This is about people holding on to the middle class with their fucking fingernails, right?
That's right.
We are facing the real risk of an absolutely declining standard of living in Canada. And I just think that they're just not fit for purpose on this message-wise.
Well, we are having a declining standard of living for the middle class in this country. And it's about to get a lot worse when people are finding that they're living in the same house that they do today. But there are 12 years left on their mortgages back to 25, and they're paying a grand more a month in mortgage payments. Like that's what's coming down the tracks this year.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that they got to sound like they're part of the solution on that.
Mark Carney said, I thought quite interestingly, that Liberals should be building. That should be the idea behind Liberals right now is we're building. And in the context of that, I read the other day that, those big tax credits in the budget that were for clean energy, those things that were supposed to match the Inflation Reduction Act, they're not in effect yet. They're still working away at the regs and tweaking the rules. That's the last budget. Biden's thing's been in place for a long time.
Well, you raised Mark Carney. I think they need some sort of inflection point if they're going to pull off any pivot on any of these things. And I have a lot of trouble seeing an alternative to removing Freeland from the post that she's in right now. Like, she's going to have to swallow herself whole in a way that lacks any credibility to have any pivot on any of this stuff. And
but they had the opportunity to do that this summer, and they didn't make that move.
Well, they didn't, but it's never too late to do the right thing. Who could actually provide new direction to the Bank of Canada around a target inflation rate? I bet you Mark Carney could. But if he came in, people would swallow that down, without any difficulty whatsoever. But I think there has to be some sort of change. There has to be some sort of change.
So you say make Carney the governor again?
No, make Carney the finance minister.
That's a fun parallel universe.
And send Freeland to something that she's better at. Like, I don't think she was a terrible foreign affairs minister, but I do think she's been a terrible finance minister, and I don't think I'm alone in that assessment. I think it's more the norm than the exception in terms of people's opinions in Ottawa and across the country.
All right, let's move on. Let's move out to Alberta, where the governing
weather's good there in the fall.
Yeah, exactly. Where the governing United Conservative Party held its convention a week or so ago. The thing that makes it newsworthy is that the news reports I have read indicate that the convention was full of people who've never been seen at UCP, PC, Wild Rose convention before. And they are representatives of a group called Take Back Alberta. And Take Back Alberta is quite right-wing, quite socially conservative. They ran people for the executive positions of the UCP and swept the executive positions. They put forward policy resolutions and passed them. And at the moment, they seem quite happy with Danielle Smith, even though her speech to the convention was not about that stuff at all. Her speech, she tried to position around the economy, and apparently pretty lukewarm response. It was only when she mentioned pronouns that the crowd got into it. So she leads a party that probably isn't even where she wants to go, and we know that she's pretty radical by some of our standards on this show. But so as we saw with Jason Kenney, the leadership review process means that these people hold a whip hand. And I'm just wondering how that vaunted party organization out there has let the party completely slip away from them, so that, Scott, we organized a party out from under a leader, and it's not easy to do quietly. Like, it's...
But isn't there a flawed assumption in your question, which is that it's been organized out from underneath her? I mean, the call's coming from inside the house, right? She's partly riding this horse. And so, she has people in her office who are advocates of, let's have our own RCMP force and our own pension plan, and let's build a wall around Alberta and a moat around Calgary. And I just think that, where this ends is that they're going to keep feeding the right. So first of all, she's not going to ban any of those elements of the sort of, the whole firewall.
Everything pulls her the wrong way. Everything pulls her the wrong way.
So she'll walk as close as she can in that direction. It won't be far enough for the crowd. It won't satisfy or mitigate them. And where this ends is that she gets usurped as leader. And like literally, her pronouns are Jason and Kenny. That's how this ends, because they've created this beast that will never, ever have a full belly.
So let me tell you a few things about trains. We've all seen them roll through a crossing or racing through a forest or field, and they seem pretty similar. Hundreds of boxcars, or maybe those cylindrical tank cars, a mile long or longer, hauled behind a locomotive or two. Fact is, though, trains are remarkable pieces of engineering. They have to be. They move just about everything. Cars, minerals, grain, petroleum, engine parts, heavy machinery, manufactured stuff, food. I could go on. In fact, I will go on. As I might have mentioned a few times on this pod, trains do their job very efficiently indeed, given the low friction physics of steel wheels on steel tracks. The only method of transport more efficient than a train is a ship at sea. And when I say they move everything, I do mean everything. Our sponsor CN moves tons of margarine, boxcars of French fries, shipments of wood pulp. No problem at all. One CN customer regularly ships high-quality windmills from Quebec to Texas, a state which, despite its reputation for consuming fossil fuel, leads the nation in wind energy generation. CN's expert crews figured out a way to efficiently accommodate the big turbines and their giant blades. There are hopper cars for grain, tank cars for just about any liquid, intermodal cars that can be directly transferred to ships or trucks, gondola cars for minerals, flat cars for steel and lumber and aluminum, cars that stack up automobiles, insulated cars to keep cargo from freezing, and reefer cars to keep fresh food from spoiling and frozen food from melting. There are special cars for logs, low cube cars for potash and fertilizer, waterproof cars, open hopper cars for metals, and a fleet of what railroaders call government hoppers, those cars with the huge familiar Canada logo emblazoned beside a stylized stalk of wheat. Here's something else I may have said a few times here. CN moves the economy. Without trains, everything stops. So the next time you see a train roll past, go ahead and marvel. Okay, I might be laying it on a little thick there, but moving everything? Man, that's impressive. Kory, we'll let you back clean up. Jordan, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's hard to feel bad for her because the monster that she helped create is now about to eat her. And I think it would be difficult to look at that room of almost 4,000 people, the vast majority of whom come from Take Back Alberta, and see it as anything other than a threat to her leadership. So I think I agree with Scott's assessment. I don't think it ends well for her. And it's clear that even though the raccoons remain in charge in Premier Smith's office, what she's putting in the window is not enough for these folks, is never going to be enough. And they're animated by a kind of social conservative purity test that anyone in the real world is destined to fail, even if you largely share their values. So I think the fact that they were allowed to gain control of the executive on all of the levers around the leadership review is a truly stunning failure of management on her team. And it shows a real weakness in the Premier's office. I was also interested about what didn't make an appearance in her speech at all, which was, of course, the Alberta pension plan. So this maybe there's a recognition that's not even a winner in that crowd, which leads us to the obvious question that we've been asking before, like, why the fuck are you pursuing this? Right. But I mean, I think that room was a real threat to her. And I think it also clearly, obviously confirms the death of the PCs in Alberta, that, that party has been swallowed entirely. And now it's going to eat her.
So, Kory, I mean, I can't take any personal delight in the fact that she's going to get killed by the monster that she created. Because, I mean, Alberta is quite regularly going to vote for conservative parties to govern them. And so I want it to be a reasonable party. I want it to be a group of people that can provide competent governance to the province, because they're going to get elected. So what are your thoughts about this?
I don't think it's a failure of her team or her ability to organize leadership. I think it's a failure of how they set up the party from the get-go. Like this sort of wide open, no holds barred, democratic processes around party management is a hangover from the Reform Party days. And it never worked well in the Reform Party, and it's never worked well in any party that's tried to use it. Look, parties are private clubs, and they're designed that way for a reason. There has to be a coherence to it. You don't want to have a bunch of political vandals and terrorists being able to, storm the gates and take the thing over and turn it into some narrow caste special interest group. Like, that's how to not win elections. And parties are private clubs with one purpose: to win elections, right? Like, they will have an ideological, bend and, a proclivity to certain approaches on public policy. Liberals more progressive, conservatives more conservative. All of that is good, but it can't be a fucking free for all where a group of outsiders funded by, dark money coming from God knows where, decide that they're going to, gin up a bunch of people to, storm a room. And guess what? 4,000 people in a province of, 4.2 million is not exactly a huge representation of the public. Like, the people who were in that room represent, themselves. It's not an indication of where the electorate is, because when you poll on the issues, the electorate in Alberta doesn't look shockingly different than the electorate in many other parts of the country around these core issues. Like, what's not animating Canada right now? I don't care what jurisdiction you're in. Pronouns. It's not. Maybe Gen Zers and university professors at York University are animated by it, but not people in the fucking real world who are worried about their mortgage. That's for sure. So, I think it's an indication to political parties everywhere that, look, if you set up your party administration and governance in such a way to leave it open to this, then you deserve what's coming for you. Like, it's absolutely idiotic. Absolutely idiotic.
Jordan, I'm inclined to agree with Kory, but the NDP have always been a party that tries to take these transparency things perhaps quite seriously. What do you think?
I mean, I think the question of party democracy is always a hot one within the NDP. I don't know. I actually would say, for example, the Greens have a lot more direct party democracy than the NDP does. Most of the structures within the federal party are representative, which provides a moderating effect in terms of how the membership is able to put people in positions of power. I think that the traditional emphasis within the NDP is really around local riding engagement, and it tends, to the party's credit, to be focused on campaigning. That's really, this is the people who come out for the spaghetti dinners and who door knock between campaigns. Like, that's the majority of the culture there. I think where you run into trouble, as we've talked about in the past, is that, you do get some people who come from an activist background, maybe, who see the party as a vehicle for other things. And when those folks get into riding associations, then you end up with, for example, the situation that Marit Stiles has faced with the odd riding association going off on that sort of thing. But I don't see it as broad-based or as systemic an issue as what you're seeing within the UCP. There are real structural things within how that party was formed that predispose it to weakness on this. Whereas within the NDP, I think it tends to be around moments or in specific areas, but broadly speaking, the overall structure still tends to hold people a little bit to a more electoral goal.
Yeah. Scott, I really think I'm in the same place as Kory is. I really, and I don't think Jordan disagrees, but I mean, I think that party decisions about the party should be made by people who have more than a fleeting interest in that party, should be made by people who have some long-term commitment to the success of that project. And I think party processes have to find some way of ensuring that.
Well, I'll maybe top that even by saying that I think that they have to have a commitment to the fundamental objective of all parties, which is to secure electoral power and electoral success. That's got to be the fundamental trade-off. And so, the challenge that I have, movement politics is always enticing, particularly when you're in opposition, because it gives you energy and money and crowds and momentum. And so it's very seducing, it's very intoxicating. But the problem is that then when you come to power, if those folks might feel that they are 1,000% committed to the political project, they might feel that but their project is different than your project. Their project can be an uncompromising demand. You follow the principles that got them to a church basement 6 years ago. And any deviation from that is an act of betrayal and evidence of failure. And so those things become incompatible with the fundamental project of a first past the post brokerage party that's job is to secure political success and electoral victory. So, I'm always, and people go, well, you're an insider political elite snot and you should be dragged behind a fucking car. But I'm always suspicious of hyper enthusiastic grassroots movement politics. It always scares the shit out of me because when you look at those people, their eyes are spinning, and I think they'll probably be Danielle Smith's Waterloo. They'll take her out eventually, and then you end up with Brian Jean, and then when Brian Jean isn't good enough, you'll end up with Captain Crazy, whoever comes next. Next
the real
lunatic
difference here is obviously that within the UCP, these folks have now grabbed the levers entirely. They're not a minority within a more electorally focused party. They are now the party.
No, they beat her choice for party president.
That's right.
Right. But let's not skip past because these are sort of political vandals who are doing something incredibly undemocratic in the name of democracy. Oh, this is democratic control of the party, et cetera, et cetera. No, it isn't. This is the hijacking of a party that was elected with a mandate to change the mandate of that party to what you want it to be through a hostile takeover. That's the opposite of democratic. Okay, that is a coup. It's not winning an election. And I have no time for that.
How can you defend that distinction you make between those folks? Like Rob Anderson in the Premier's office, Deputy Chief of Staff or whatever, Executive Director, whatever his title is, could be, First Treasury to the Take Back Alberta, let's eat people's liver movement.
Well, I'm happy to talk you through it. Like, look, Kenney had a broad mandate compared to what Danielle ended up with after a takeover of the party leadership. Okay, but now she has a Democratic mandate, and there are certain things that were included in that Democratic mandate and certain things that weren't. And now we're seeing yet again another takeover of the party out from underneath the leader that actually won a mandate from the broader electorate. And I'll predict what I think will happen if they get their way. They'll end up losing power because they are not representative of the priorities of the electorate.
How can you position yourself as the opponent of that movement when you were its instrument in order to secure your political position?
Well, not everything is easy. It's kind of like, the federal liberals trying to look like they exercise fiscal discipline, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. So, I think there's challenges around this, but I do think, it's very bad for the party. It's very bad for the province. Look, as I said to you guys, we have our little chat offline. When it comes to managing the party and things like this in between a party leadership, and I'll make an exemption for that. But, absent a broad-based party leadership race where lots of people are voting, I am 10% less Democratic than Kim Jong-un when it comes to management of political parties. It's a dictatorship between leadership races, and that's the way it should be.
All right, let's move to our clipping of the day. Our cursed clipping is from the New York Times, and it's from Ian Bailey. And he is comparing Trudeau's political situation with Joe Biden's. I'll read you an excerpt. For months now, Mr. Trudeau's Liberal Party has been rapidly sinking in public opinion surveys, while more recent polls suggest that Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre would win any election held now. Similarly, new polls by the New York Times and Siena College have found that Mr. Biden is trailing Donald Trump in 5 of the 6 most important battleground states. Disaffected voters in both countries share a major concern, inflation and the economy in general. Many factors, David Coletto said, contribute to that dissatisfaction, but inflation, higher interest rates, housing costs, and a general feeling of ennui about the economy are at the top. Voters polled in the Times Siena survey by a 59% to 37% margin, the largest gap relating to any issue in the survey, said that they had more trust in Mr. Trump than Mr. Biden on the economy. The other big factor for Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Coletto said, is simply that many voters are tiring of a leader like him. Mr. Biden may be only in his first term as president, but he's been a national political figure since being elected to the Senate 50 years ago. Mr. Biden's age, 80, is also an issue. In the Times Siena survey, 71% of respondents said he was too old to be effective as president. Only 39% thought that of Mr. Trump. So, Jordan, I thought this column was a stretch. Other than the fact that they're both behind their opponents, I don't see a lot in common between the two situations.
I guess the only other thing that I saw in common is that for all of the weaknesses, they're both likely to stay. That's the other thing. I think maybe for slightly different reasons, but Biden is there. There's no credible successor there. He is not unliked, disliked in the same way that Trudeau is. It's his age is really the core issue. But if Trump is the nominee and manages to get out from under these indictments, then there's just really not a scenario in which Biden isn't the candidate, the Democratic candidate. So I think he's likely to stay for that reason. And for Trudeau, maybe it's a similar reason. There's no obvious successor that is waiting in the wings. And for all his weaknesses, where he is genuinely not liked, or maybe not, it's not such a strong negative, but it's really people are just very tired of him on a personal level, which is not quite the case for Biden. He still is potentially can turn up again as the strong campaigner that we've seen in the past. We don't know, but it's not likely that he is going to actually get ousted before the next campaign. So that's the only other thing I could say that I saw in common between the two of them. But I really think Trudeau's problems are worse. I think his problems are much more difficult to overcome and more multifaceted in the way that they interact with some of the situational stuff that he's facing around inflation, unemployment, and things like that. Like his personal weaknesses overlying with that situation is really, really tough. So I think that they've both got problems, but Biden also had some he had some good news over the last week. Abortion continues to be a fruitful issue for the Democrats in the US. Like there's juice there for them. And they're out there making the case against Trump, which is more than can be said for the Liberals and for Trudeau's team. So they're fighting this uphill battle, but I'm not seeing evidence of the same here in Canada.
Kory, I would have thought the reverse of Jordan. I would have thought that Biden's problem was more serious than Trudeau's, because his core problem you can't literally do anything about. Like if Joe Biden was 65 years old, he'd win this election, right?
Yeah, I think, well, he'd still have a lot of the same problems because, like, I have a very different read on the polling than you do, Jordan. He has got a lot of unpopularity around his economic management right now, and it looks a lot the same as Trudeau's. Like, people are not happy with how the administration has been managing the economy, and the same sorts of pressures around inflation and cost of living, and they're all there. Like they're all there for both administrations. And, you just layer on top of that this thing that, as David points out, he can't do anything about. Now, they are in an inherently better situation than the Democratic Party because their system actually anticipates this kind of thing. There is basically somebody waiting to be on the ballot called the vice president. And what I thought was the most interesting thing about the Times poll around swing states is Kamala Harris does better than he does in every state and is winning against Trump in every swing state. So, like, there is a perfectly good candidate waiting in the wings called Kamala Harris, and I know that she's not the greatest candidate to ever run for office, but she is, by the numbers right now, a hell of a lot better than Biden is. And there's an alternative sort of waiting in the wings that we don't have in Canada vis-a-vis Trudeau. I don't know. I think they're both in trouble. I think they both are going to stay. I think they're both going to ride this, this ship to the bottom of the ocean if left to their own devices. And I think increasingly, others in their party are pretty upset about it.
Scott, you picked this clipping. What'd you like about it?
Well, I just think it's a super interesting comparison to kind of kick around in just the way we are now. So when you say that Biden's got the worst problem because his core problem was one that he can't fix, it's that he's ancient. I think you have to look at it through the other lens, which is that he's got a core asset, notwithstanding his core problem, that Trudeau does not, which is that he has an opponent who appears to be absolutely worse than him. And so now that may not be showing up right now in the latest complexion of the swing state polling, but I think that that Trump has the ability to light up the electorate against him, that he can really motivate that base. I think that it's easy to make Trump demonic because he is demonic. I think that the Liberals have gone too long in doing what they can to demonize Poilievre. And so I think it's going to be I think it's much harder to conjure up the same asset. My opponent is you may not like me, but you really, really can't accept my opponent. I think that Biden can make that argument more persuasively than the Liberals at this point, and I really worry about that.
What can they say about Trump? What does a negative campaign against Trump look like? What can you say about Trump that people don't already know and have accepted?
Okay, but can I just jump in on this? Because this notion that it's just his age is not accurate. Like, that is not what the research says.
I agree with that. They both have the same problem of economic malaise. It sucks to be in government now.
Okay, yeah, but here is why, one of the main reasons why Trump is doing better in the polls. He's viewed as being better at managing the economy. He's viewed as, like, it's not that people think good things about Trump. They don't. They think that he will manage the economy better and he will bring interest rates down and that their personal economic life will benefit. That's why he's winning. It's not that they're unaware that he's a demagogic asshole with a bunch of criminal charges pending. Like, They know that, but they don't think well of any politician, and so demagogic asshole, maybe not terribly democratic, et cetera, but at least he'll manage the economy well. That's the part that's actually
the other difference, of course,
here
is that the U.S. economy is actually doing much better than the Canadian economy by a lot of measures, and so Biden faces primarily a credibility issue on this. But one that, potentially he can begin to dig himself out from under based on the facts. Trudeau doesn't have the same option there.
Yeah, but it's kind of the same problem that the Liberals have here. So then Biden, I see these things put out by Ron Klain, like, hey, we're kicking the shit out of Spain and stuff. And it's just like, it doesn't register with people who are feeling distressed and put upon. Yes, the U.S. economy is growing better than the Canadian economy, but that growth is not experienced equally across the income spectrum. And it's the same fundamental issue is going on there that is going on here. It's the middle class are getting fucked hard. They're the ones who are losing wealth and relative standard of living. And how much more money somebody who's running a hedge fund makes doesn't really change the political equation for somebody in a suburb, middle class suburb, who's worried about whether or not they're going to lose their house.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems that Biden also faces is the way that the next election in the U.S. is clearly becoming existential for U.S. democracy. And when the stakes are too high, it doesn't work, right? Because this is partially also what's impeding the Democrats in terms of their ability to talk to people about cost of living, about things that are impacting them, because everything is now tied up with whether U.S. democracy can survive another term of Trump. And this is bad overall for everybody.
Yeah.
Very few people are voting on democracy and whether or not that's going to come. Like, that just is just not on the ballot for most people. Maybe it should be, but it isn't.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's squeeze in our last topic here. Looks like we're going to be able to do it. The confidence and supply agreement. We've been talking today about how difficult politically the next year might be between a recession hitting Canada and lost jobs and mortgages being rolled over at really high interest rates. Could be a very, very brutal political year. Which raises the question about the stability again of the confidence and supply agreement. How long can the NDP tie themselves to a government that will be likely increasingly unpopular over the course of the year? But on the other hand, it looks like if they were to pull the plug on it, not only would they lose any chance at things like pharmacare, et cetera, but it looks like they'd end up with 200 Poilievre seats in the House of Commons. So it's a jam. It's a jam for them. And I'll give Jordan a minute to think about it, Scott, and ask you how you think it's going to play.
I think it plays with Singh propping up the government as long as possible. This government might never cease. This government might remain in office. The Governor General may have to ask Singh and Trudeau to come to a meeting and say, listen, it's been 11 years, guys, okay? Knock it off. We still don't have pharmacare, but you motherfuckers will not move out. And I say that because you can't think about anything other than the gravest risk if you're Singh. You know that if you pull the plug, as you just said, all right, you may be tied to an unpopular government, but that means you're tied to a government that's going to get defeated. So you're going to elect a parliament that you will hold no influence in, that will deliver an agenda that you and your people find repugnant from start to finish. So they're gonna look to Trudeau and say, for the love of fuck, throw us a bone every once in a while, make a sound. I thought, by the way, one of the unremarked upon beautiful pieces of politics last week was our friend Seamus Regan. He brought out Boulderies to his announcement, stood with him, gave the guy a little love, gathered the labor movement. I think that works for the NDP. I think it works for the government. I think it made Seamus look strong. And you don't see that happening very often, but he gave them lots of props and lots of oxygen. And I think, you do that a couple times on a couple files over the course of the next 2 years, and that gives Singh enough cover, and you just preserve this thing. I do not think it makes any sense for them to pull the plug, and therefore I don't think they will pull the plug.
Jordan?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's clear that Singh and the Prime Minister are united in a need for time right now. And I would actually make the case that over the last 2 weeks, what we've seen is a strengthened confidence and supply agreement rather than a weakened one. So I think it's a mistake to read the NDP voting against the government on the issue of the carbon tax exemption for home heating as a weakening of the agreement. This was, I think, a necessary distancing for the NDP when the government had so badly bungled the file. They needed to come down on the right side of that issue, on the side of affordability, and they're still out there making their own case around their own solution on that. And I think it paves the path for other potential cooperation. And certainly this week, it would be difficult to overstate how important the anti-scab legislation is. This is something that the NDP has worked on for almost 2 decades. They've made 8 attempts previous to this to get this legislation. It was a huge ask in the labor movement. So the fact that it's come forward, that's a significant win for them with a big stakeholder group. So they are going to ride that for a while. I think the next thing, obviously, is the issue of pharmacare. And so I would expect to see between now and the end of the year, I don't think we're going to see the whole hog. I don't think that's going to happen. But really what the New Democrats and the Liberals need to do is come together and find something that's peace with honor, that gets them to a place where they can tick the box on the confidence and supply agreement item on pharmacare without worsening some of the other problems the Liberals are facing, and then move on to other issues that are more fruitful for both of them to cooperate. That's what they got to get themselves out of the corner on this issue, show some movement to the NDP, some result on that, and then move ahead on other things. And I think that that's likely what we're going to see as we get some more details between now and the end of the year. As to how long this thing lasts, I mean, it's the highest of stakes for sure for Singh. Polls being what they are, there's no question that he would be delivering a Conservative government if he pulled support right now. So it's going to be a really strong impetus for him to pull support. And it's not going to be on an issue that's unfavorable to the NDP.
Wait a second. Here's one place where the rubber hits the road, though. And I think I know how Leighton would have answered this question, but I don't really know how Singh would answer this question. What if the polls moved to 24 Liberal, 21 NDP? And you were going to get a Poilievre government, majority government, but you were going to get a much different balance of seats between the Liberals and the NDP than you currently had.
Well, then that's a different political reality.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that does change the calculus for sure. But that's not the reality that Singh is facing right now. There's still a gap there. And I think that,
Yeah, but the gap between the Liberals and the NDP is now closer than the gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives.
Yeah.
That's not good enough. But if you're saying that's not good enough to go Leighton, because Leighton ended up with eventually with Quebec, right? Like Singh doesn't, 21% may mean that he's within striking distance of the Liberals, or let's say he's at 24 and he's 28.
Think of the 2006
but the concentration of votes isn't a good spot for him. It just means that he's going to be second everywhere when he used to be only second some places. Like I
think you would have to see strong regional movement that actually guarantees you some seat gains. That's really what you would have to see. But I think for the moment, I would say the agreement is working as intended for both parties. And I think it's actually working better than it was in earlier parts of the year.
Kory's sitting there like a big cat ready to pounce.
I think it's terrible for the Liberals. I think I'd tell them to fuck off, and I'd try to chart and actually come up with a strategy and a message and a narrative that's yours and challenge them to defeat you so you actually have some definition. I think they've allowed this stupid agreement to define their priorities and spend their money and decide which voters they're actually working with. And in going through that process, they've actually abandoned their electoral coalition, the one that got them there in 2015. So when I say they've abandoned the middle class in favor of, niche voter groups that the NDP decide, that's what the confidence and supply agreement has done. And now they want to do more of it. Look, the NDP aren't going to call an election because they're at 18%, the same they've been for years now. And they have no money, same as they've had for years now. Like, they're still in debt. They haven't paid off the last campaign, and they're at 18 points. Like, they're not going to call an election because they will get trounced. They will get fucking trounced. But in order to, sleep better at night, signing on to this agreement is I think, slowly asphyxiating the Liberal Party in any narrative that they have. And they should just walk the fuck away.
There you go. Let that be the last word. And let us call on Gordon Pinsent to bring it home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Did I say that? Jesus, has Poilievre so taken over the fucking vocabulary of Canadian politics that I just said, bring it home? All right. Wow.
Well, we can get it done.
David Herle,
we'll get it
common
done.
sense conservative.
We're for the people here.
I gotta go wash my mouth out with soap. All right, who's going to start?
Oh, I'll go first.
All right.
So my Hey You this week is going out to Minister Wilkinson. And of course, it can only be about that delicious order paper question that showed that his department has spent $670,000 with KPMG to consult the consultants about how to cut public spending on consultants. You could not make this shit up. So my Hey You is to any other ministers who may have had a similar difficulty extracting themselves from their relationships with KPMG.
Are you now providing these services, Jordan?
That's right. And you know what? I'm going to do it for free. This is for the good of the country. Don't sign these contracts. Get out from underneath this stuff. It is deadly. This is the $16 orange juice of your fucking government. You have to crack down on this, or you're going to lose the opportunity to control all of these things. So if you are absolutely out there undercutting your finance minister and your prime minister about the narrative of the fiscal update, exactly as they're trying to have some sort of paltry sense of spending control, even though we've talked about how futile that is, you have not understood the assignment.
There you go. Kory?
Well, I'm going to do a hey you to all the NGOs out there who and think tanks that are thinking about climate change and looking and evaluating different policy approaches. Time to get busy looking at what a plan without a carbon tax looks like, and to decouple yourself from the Liberal Party of Canada and their narrative around a carbon tax being the only way to advance action against climate change and getting carbon reductions. Time to put your thinking caps on, time to put your Liberal partisan hats on the shelf and come up with some ideas if you care about this stuff, because a carbon tax is going away, whether it's piecemeal by one exemption at a time or whether it's through a change in government. And if you want to actually see something happen, it's time to start creating some distance and some light between you and the Liberal Party's approach.
Yes. All right, Cole Caulfield, you got a hey you over there?
Yeah. My hey you goes out to that old fast friend, puckish creature that lingers always in the woodland of Parliament Hill. I'm talking, of course, about a good, juicy rumor that rips around the cocktail glasses of Ottawa, that barges through the Met and it eats up the city in a couple of daily gulps. Last week, Kory kind of flirted with this. Last week, there was this raging 36-hour rumor, the beautiful political rumor. That's my hey you. A rumor that Mark Carney was going to be appointed to cabinet. Mona Fortier was going to leave cabinet. She was going to the Senate or an ambassadorship or possibly on some deep space mission. But in any event, Carney was getting Ottawa Vanier, and he was going to be brought into cabinet, and there was going to be a shakeup. And this was being recited within the, I love the return of the rumor so much, because within about 4 hours, I heard it from like 7 people who represented 9 political parties and coming from all corners of the country. Well, listen, I don't know if you've heard, but like I'm kind of plugged into shit and I've been told, and don't fucking say I said anything. Don't put my name against this, but Carney's gone. 4 days over. It's done. And I love it. It may come true for all I know. I don't know. She's denied it, whatever. It's, nothing happened. But my God, for that 24 hours, that 36 hours, we had that big, juicy hamburger of a rumor, and I was glad to see it.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the kind of stuff that you do if you're trying to destabilize a leader, is to put out juicy little rumor burgers like that endlessly that basically chip away at the authority.
I think you're overestimating the strategic competence of some.
Just give day-drinking creatures of Ottawa something to chew on. Besides
I've always loved the Bill Clinton line that turtle didn't get on a fence post on its own. Yeah, somebody put it there. Somebody put that rumor out there, and there's a reason.
All right. My hey you goes out to Minister Guilbeault. and I'm going to look right at you and say, I really actually respect you. I've followed your whole career in the environment in Quebec. I know the reputation you've built. I know how much you care about these things. But the reality is that the Liberal Party's not going to get reelected if climate change is in the window as its lead argument for reelection. And it's not going to get reelected unless it takes some of the cost burden off of people, or the perceived cost burden off of people in the next couple of years. And so you have a choice. You're critical to the government's credibility in the province of Quebec, which is already showing some signs of frailty. And if you walk away, you can cripple the government, or you could put a little water in your wine and you could help sell the government in Quebec and maintain its credibility on the environment while it has to make these adjustments. Any climate progress has to go through the political system, and you still know what the best option is for Canada. So help this government get reelected. That's my hey you. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here today again. God, you look somber, Jordan. That was obviously not a hey you that really resonated with you.
Just
anyway. I want to thank everybody who watched or listened today. I want to thank the three of you. It was great. Come back next week for more Curse of Politics. We got to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, who make this show possible every week. See you next week. Take care of yourselves.